Well, we've got a bay of the lake that we need to analyze, Phil. I know we got a lot of wind here, but there's some interesting structure here.
Yeah.
To me, it looks pretty boring.
No, but to me, it excites me because there's a number of places I'd want to start. First of all, you've got that narrows and the 2 points that come out. They're going to cause a little saddle, and fish are going to relate to that. They're going to cruise over top of it. They're going to cruise around where that saddle drops into deeper water. Right up along the shoreline here, you can see the changing color we talked about. You've got that shallow area, and then it falls away.
Really drops off, doesn't it?
And trout are going to cruise right along, just like on a river. That dark water, or where the current seams meet, you can sort of view that as a current seam, where trout are going to cruise along those perimeters. They've got that proximity to deep water, so if they get spooked, they're gone, and yet they can make a little foray onto that shoal and pick off a scud, a leech, something like that.
We have a dam over there. This lake has a couple dams. Now,
Yes.
that's going to be deep right there, isn't it?
It's going to be deep, but you're also, sometimes there is a little water movement out of some impoundments. They're going to be attracted to any kind of flowing water. You'll notice too, right on this point, we've got some weeds as well, and weed beds are just a fantastic structure. To me, they contain everything you need. There's food, there's protection from the trout. They can go through those weeds like you and I walk through the forest, and through photosynthesis, there's oxygen there that they can pick up for their comfort.
So how would you start fishing this? Where would your battle plan? Where would you try your cast first?
Well, being as it's windy, you're going to try and get out of that a little bit. So I'm going to perhaps go up and try that saddle area. I'll have the wind at my back. The wind hasn't had a chance to sort of pick up momentum over the expanse of the lake. We can work those areas there. We can work some of that steep shoreline there where it falls in, because trout will cruise just like in front here, and the safety of deep waters nearby. You can also, almost the complete opposite, is come in and work this shoreline, because this shoreline is being worked over by wave action, which is going to disturb food sources out, and that wave action provides overhead cover for the trout, so they're going to be very comfortable coming in here and foraging.
A good place if you were in a float tube, so you had the wind behind you.
Exactly. Yeah,
or in a boat.
Yeah, I'd come in here and I'd anchor myself. Probably have to let out a little bit of rope to make sure I got a good purchase. I stay planted and work the fly, cast within a foot of the bank, and strip the fly out, let it sink a few seconds, strip it, fly out, and you're working that fly down the slope of that drop-off. Very effective technique. You
just mentioned that the cattle just moved up the road, and you said that was a good sign. What do you mean by that?
Well, we always joke that when the cows are feeding, I've got a good friend who's a guide in the Kamloops area, Gord Honey, and he often says that when he goes out for a day on the water with his clients, if he sees wildlife moving, he's pretty rest assured that the fish will be active and moving as well. It's funny, I always joke, I don't know how humans got to the top of the food chain. Maybe this opposable thumb is worth more than we realize, because all the rest of the animals seem far more in touch with their surroundings than we do some days.
I mean, they don't go to McDonald's?
Nope.
Well, let's go take a look at the other part of the lake, because you really want to assess the whole lake before you start to fish it.
Exactly. You want to have a quick look around, build yourself a game plan, and you follow logically along. We don't want to just sort of jump in the boat and let's go left.
All right, let's walk out and take a look at it.
Okay.
Well, now we've come to a good view of the lake, and if you can get a view like this and get up on a hill, not all lakes have hills like this, but we can really see the whole lake. Now, we came from over there for that little bay, and man, it opens up. There's all kinds of places.
Yeah, this vantage point is fantastic, because it just, all the clues are here, and I guess this would be a good argument for those that say lakes don't have any character. Come out and have a look at this. There is just features galore here for us to explore.
Well, let's define some lake terms like shoals and bars. I like bars myself the best.
Yeah, there are different kind of bars out here, but you're right, Jack. As with rivers and streams, there's riffles and runs. On lakes, if we start from the banks, we have the shoreline area, which generally is that area I'll call that extends out 1 to 4 feet deep. Then you have the shoal area. This is fly fishing, where we're going to spend our most times, and that's let's say 5 to 20 feet deep, depending on suspended matter and sunlight. That's where you're going to get your maximum sunlight penetration, your weed growth. That's the larder of the lake. That's where all the feeding is going to take place, and that's where, as fly fishers, we're best suited to take advantage of those opportunities with the line choices and the fly patterns we choose. Then we go into the drop-off area, and that's, in general terms, any area that is a change in depth. Your classic drop-off is literally that. It's just like a cliff face. But drop-offs can be subtle. They can be almost step-like. Again, as you look around the lay of the land, you can see how above ground, how land changes its elevation, and the same goes on underneath the water. And then you have the deep water zone, and that, from a stillwater fly fishing perspective, I'm considering water 20 feet deep or greater. And that's not necessarily the easiest water for us to chart or to present flies to, but sometimes you've got to do it, and we do have methods that we can get on there.
On the drive down here, you had said you'd mapped this lake out and you hadn't been here. How can you do that?
Well, on many lakes, what we're talking about with maps is actually bathymetric maps or underwater contour maps. And these are, you can get them off websites nowadays. There's books put out with them, and on select waters you can find out, and they just simply give you an idea of the underwater world, where the little humps are, where the little rises in the bottom contours are, where the drop-offs are, where the points are, how they extend. You'll see lines on these bathymetric maps. When the lines are close together, that means a steep or rapid change in depth, and when they're spread out, that's a more gradual change in depth, so that might be an indication of a shoal. And before you leave the driveway, you can mark out a little route map, a little game plan, at least when you get to the shores, and you're all swept up in the excitement of going fishing, you've got a game plan to follow and go along and guide your choices.
If you're going to pick 5 areas to fish, and that's about the time that we've got, which would you pick as the 5 best areas on this lake?
Well, if we look from right to left here, Jack, we've got 4 points of land out there that are very interesting. The land adjacent to those points is going to carry out. It's going to be shallow for a ways. There's lots of edges that trout can cruise along with depth change there. As we move towards the middle, we've got this little narrows in here, and you can see how the land tapers down and lays flat, and that's probably going to be quite shallow in there. Lots of weed growth, lots of good food sources, scuds, damsels, chironomids, all the major food groups are going to be inhabiting that area. Trout are going to go in there and feed. This crescent-shaped island is very interesting as well. You can see how the points, we can work both points there. We can also work where the wind is sweeping up against the edge of the island there, and you can see the color changes here, the changes in depth, and we're going to work those edges. Again, those trout are going to cruise those margins. Out in the middle of the main lake here is a really interesting structure, one I really like, and those are sunken islands.
Yeah, I saw those.
And
definitely can tell that they're a lot shallower.
Yeah, you can see the color change there that we talked about, and again, we've got the trout's primary source of protection in the lake is deeper water, so they can cruise along the edges of that sunken island, make little forays over the top of it, and if anything unsettles them, they're off over the edge and gone. So they're going to like those areas. And then this dam looks interesting. From a wind perspective alone, we can get out of the wind a bit, but that steep drop, trout are going to be able to cruise very close to the shoreline. Looks like we've got some rocks in there that they can get in and forage and choose whatever food sources may be living amongst them. So some very interesting features. So those are the kind of the 5 key areas I'd start with today on this lake.
Well, and we're going to start first bank fishing.
Yes, we are.
And where do you think we want to start?
Let's try
the dam?
Yeah, let's try and get out of the wind a bit, and we can work our way back towards, but we've got some nice open rangeland here, so we don't have to worry about backcasts. Not all lakes offer this. Some of them are shrouded in trees, and it's just not possible, and that's where the boat comes in place. But we have the opportunity to fish from shore, so let's take advantage of it.
Well, here we are at the dam. It's deep. I can tell by just looking in the water, it just goes right off. Probably at least 10, 12 feet deep.
Yeah, it's ideal. You can see, again, we've come up here, the 8 of our Polaroids. We can quickly scan before we get too close, because it's not uncommon, especially in these windy conditions.
There goes a fish just swimming
right
over there.
Sea fish cruising. So we don't want to come up here and spook them all away. But you're right, you can see
insects.
Yeah, and we've got little bait fish cruising along the shoreline here.
Look at that.
Little school of them.
Yep.
So a productive place. Trout are going to be very comfortable coming in here and foraging amongst the rocks and the weeds here, and if anything spooks them, as we saw, they quickly depart into deeper water and they'll come back.
Well, right now, you know the time of the year. You have a pretty good idea. Even though you've never been to this lake, you've fished Canada all your life. We're in the 3rd week of May. What should we expect? Wouldn't you have a pretty good idea what insects are going to be out there?
Yeah, this time of the year, Jack, obviously the most #1 hatch that we chase all season long are chironomids, so You're always going to want to fish those. This is prime habitat for damsels to emerge. They love crawling out on those long stem shoreline vegetation. Dragonflies are the same. Obviously we've seen minnows cruising along the banks here. Leeches are always prevalent, and scuds. So there's just a host of potential candidates we can imitate.
Can I ask you a question here?
You sure can.
In a few minutes, would you take us through the insects that you should look at it and thing? But right now I want to go fishing and start techniques, but
yeah,
you'll take us through the insects and what to look for?
It's critical to know what the fish like to feed on in still waters.
Well, right now we have a great opportunity here at this lake. We know from what the guide Brent, oh, look at that.
Look
right
at that.
There was a fish, 2 fish. Look at that. Oh,
look at
3
that.
fish.
Look,
4 fish.
They're sipping up on the surface, Jack. Something, and with this wind, it's quite possible we could have some terrestrial action. Not the most common encounter on a lake, but again, these grassy grasslands, prime ants, termites, grasshoppers, and just
beetles.
You name it, anything that ends up on the water, they're opportunistic.
Oh, boy, they're going crazy.
Yeah.
And again.
Another one.
Look at that, and again. Okay, enough of this.
Enough talking, let's go
Okay, now we've got 2 setups.
Yes, we do.
We talked about this earlier. I have a clear intermediate, and I have a leech and a scud. And the other rod with your indicator, I've got chronomids. And what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking neither of us should do the same thing when we're trying to discover what they're taking. Why don't you start with the intermediate line?
Sure.
It's a great way to cover water and find active fish. And once we catch that fish, we have methods. We can do a throat analysis and see what they're on. And I'll go with the chironomid technique here and give something from the other end of the spectrum, something very slow and static. Maybe they're in the mood to chase their food today, and maybe they're not.
Well, we want to catch a fish. I mean, the object now is catch a fish to see what we can learn, right? So we're not going to try to catch a whole bunch of fish. We want to catch one fish and work some magic, right?
Yeah, once that's done, everything else is gravy.
Well, let's go to it.
All right, then.
I'm going to go put this dry rod down. Oh, boy. Holy cow. How big do you say that fish?
That's at least 8 pounds.
At least 8 pounds? That's what I like about lakes. I like about lakes. All right, let's get going.
Okay.
Phil, are you ready?